A Werewolf Shifter Romance by Cauliflower Campbell. Chapter 1. Sold as Tax. The morning Silverpine village held its breath. Before the mist even finished settling over the rooftops, the first crack of cold morning air had crept into Helena's lungs. She woke long before the sun thought to rise, as she always did, because sleep never stayed long in her cottage. Peace did not dwell there. The tiny room she shared with Chris was dim, lit only by the faint bluish glow of dawn. She lay still for a moment, listening to the wind brushing against the warped shutters, listening to her heartbeat. She knew what waited outside her bedroom door. She always knew. Helena pushed off the thin blanket and sat up, her bones aching with the leftover bruises from nights past. Her feet touched the cold ground, and she inhaled sharply. Today will be like any other day, she reminded herself. Just survive until night. Chris stirred beside her, curled up like a kitten beneath his blanket. His dark lashes fluttered, and he pressed closer to the warmth she left behind. Helena gently tucked the blanket around him. "Sleep a little longer," she whispered. "You deserve it." She dressed quietly, her fingers numb from the cold, and stepped into the narrow hallway. The air inside the cottage already smelled of irritation. Her mother was awake. Helena moved into the small kitchen, heart low, shoulders drawn in as small as possible. A habit so ingrained she didn't realize she did it anymore. Morning light filtered through the cracks in the wooden shutters, striping the floor in pale gold. The house looked calm enough in silence. The old fireplace full of last night's ashes, the table with one broken leg, the patched roof letting in faint drafts. But Helena knew better. Silence here was a snake waiting to strike. She filled the cracked basin with cold water, dipping her hands carefully so the splash wouldn't be heard. Her mother hated noise, hated anything Helena did that wasn't perfect. Helena rolled her sleeves and began washing the morning dishes left from the night before. Her hands shook in the icy water, turning red. Outside, the soft bleating of village goats drifted through the open window. Birds started their morning choruses. Other families were waking warmly, peacefully. Just not this one. Helena's mother hit the wooden doorframe with her stirring spoon as she entered, her mouth already a thin, angry line carved into her face. She didn't even greet Helena. "Useless girl! If you break a single cup, I'll break your skull next!" Helena didn't flinch anymore, not visibly. Inside, the words lodged in her chest like rusted nails. "Yes, mother," she murmured. Obedient, quiet, invisible. It was the only way to survive here. Chris appears like hope in small feet. A shadow approached the doorway, small, hesitant, yet brave in its own way. Chris, barefoot, hair sticking in all directions, a smudge of soot across his cheek like a warrior's mark, even though he was only 8. He peeked into the kitchen with a hopeful little smile. "Lena," he whispered, "I fed the chickens. All of them." His voice carried the proud, earnest tone of a boy who desperately wanted to do something good, to be useful, to be seen. Helena's heart melted softly, the way it always did for him. He was the only gentleness in her life. "You did good," she whispered back. "You always do." For a moment, the cottage felt almost livable, like Chris's warmth could overpower the coldness soaking into the walls. But then, thud, thud, thud. Their father's boots struck the floorboards like warning drums. "Boy," he barked. Chris stiffened instantly. Helena stepped subtly, almost automatically, between them. "He was helping me," she lied. Her father glared. "You defend him the way you wish someone defended you. Pathetic." Chris's little hand found Helena's, squeezing tightly. She squeezed back once. A promise, a comfort, a silent, "I'm here." The village stirs in fear. Before Helena could return to her work, something outside shifted, a change in the air. The birds stopped singing. The wind stilled. A rumble rolled through the village square, heavy and deep, like distant thunder. Helena froze. Her parents stopped moving. Chris looked up at her, wide-eyed. "Hurry!" someone shouted from outside. "The king's tax party. They're here early." Helena's stomach sank. No, not today, not this early, not when things had been quiet. Her mother darted to the window. She yanked the shutters open a crack and peered out. "They've reached the square already," she hissed. "Find the grain sacks." Helena wiped her hands on her apron. "I'll get them." But before she could move, her father's hand clamped around her arm, squeezing hard enough to bruise. "Leave them," he grunted. Helena blinked. "But we have to pay." Her mother turned, and her eyes gleamed with a strange, cruel finality Helena rarely saw so clearly. "We know the rules. We also know our solution." Helena couldn't breathe. "Mother?" Her father stepped close enough that his sour breath heated her cheek. "You drain this house like a curse. You're wolfless and infertile. You will never plant a seed in this family," he spat. "Might as well be useful for once." Helena's heart pounded so loudly she could hear it in her ears. Chris stumbled from the hallway, trembling. "What's happening?" Helena pulled him close. "Nothing. Stay behind me." But her father shoved her forward, making her stumble. "They'll take her instead of the tax." The words hit Helena harder than any blow. Chris burst into tears. "No, Mama, no," he screamed. "Not Helena." His mother didn't even look at him. The drums of the king's men. A horn blasted from outside. Its vibration rattled the cottage walls. Then came the drums. Boom, boom, boom. Each beat drew the soldiers closer, their boots striking stone in perfect rhythm. The villagers had long whispered about the man who led the tax party, the one wolves feared, the one even the royal court bowed to. General Kane. His name alone made the air colder. His arrival felt like winter crawling into their bones. General Kane entered the cottage. The cottage door slammed open with such force the hinges groaned. Sunlight poured in. Dust spiraled like startled spirits. And then, he stood there. General Kane, tall, armored in black, broad-shouldered. A presence carved from authority and danger. Wolf crests decorated the steel on his chest. His dark cloak trailed behind him, grazing the floor like a shadow seeking prey. His face was unreadable, a mask of cold power. His blue eyes scanned the room once, assessing, calculating. Behind him, soldiers lined the yard with spears gleaming like death in the morning sun. Kane's voice filled the cottage. "Payment." Helena's father stepped forward, quickly. "General, we, couldn't gather the grains in time." Kane raised a brow. "You know the law." Her mother pushed Helena forward. "We offer our daughter. She is young, strong, and obedient." Helena nearly fell from the force of the shove. Chris clung to her skirts, crying uncontrollably. Kane stared at her, piercing, analyzing. He smelled she was wolfless. He saw she was pretty. He saw she was trembling. His jaw tightened in silent acceptance. "Step forward." Helena shook her head. "Please, not me. My brother needs me. We have grains in the barn." Her father shoved her again. "Take her." Chris screamed. "She didn't do anything." Kane stepped closer. His shadow swallowed her and Chris entirely. "You will come with us." "I can't leave him," Helena cried. "Please, he'll be alone." Kane grabbed her face in one swift, cold motion, fingers digging into her cheeks. "This is the law." Helena trembled violently. "Chris," she whispered, "run inside." But Chris didn't move. He held her tighter, sobbing. Kane's patience ended. He swung his arm. A brutal strike collided with the side of her head. White exploded in her vision, her knees buckled, her grip loosened. Everything blurred. She heard Chris screaming her name. Raw, panicked. "Helena!" Then the world went dark. Chapter 2. The Palace Servant. Helena woke to the hard, sharp sound of metal clanging against metal. A sound so loud and violent that it didn't simply echo, it shook her from sleep. Her eyes flew open. For a few long seconds, her vision blurred and spun, her mind trying to claw its way out of the fog of exhaustion and terror. Her breath hitched, shallow and rapid, as she sat upright so quickly the thin mat beneath her rustled loudly. This wasn't her home. The realization struck her in a single blow, cold, merciless, and final. She wasn't in the tiny room with straw on the floor and cracks in the wooden walls. She wasn't next to her little brother, curled around him for warmth on cold nights. She wasn't in Silver Pine Village, with its muddy paths, smoky chimneys, and constant shouting from her parents. She was in the palace, somewhere deep inside it, somewhere she didn't know, somewhere she couldn't escape. Cold air slithered across her skin, raising goosebumps along her arms. Her body instinctively curled inward, her arms wrapping around her knees as she shivered uncontrollably. Her breath came out in small puffs of white mist. She hadn't realized how cold the chamber truly was until she saw it. The room around her was dim and silent, except for the uneven breaths of the other girls. At least 20, maybe more, huddled together on the floor like discarded dolls. Some were curled tightly on themselves, tears trailing silently down their faces. Some stared at the barred windows with blank, empty expressions, as if their souls were hovering somewhere just outside their bodies. Some shook with fear, arms wrapped around thin torsos, their nightgowns flimsy and soaked with sweat or tears. The stone beneath Helena had absorbed the chill of the night. It clung to her like ice. Moisture from the stones dampened the thin garment she wore, making her shiver harder. Moonlight trickled in through the tall barred windows, painting the chamber in strips of pale silver light. Dust floated in the beams like drifting stars. For a moment, a tiny, fragile moment, Helena let herself hope that maybe this was all a dream, that she would blink and find herself back in that cold, cramped shack, waking Chris for the morning chores. Then the door exploded open. The boom rattled the entire chamber. Helena flinched so violently her teeth clacked together. 3 palace guards stormed inside. Their heavy boots thundered against the stone, their armor glinting in the moonlight. They were huge, twice Helena's size, with broad shoulders and stone-hard expressions, and cruelty in their eyes. The air shifted instantly. Silence shattered into raw fear. Girls scrambled backward, pressing themselves against the walls. Helena's heart slammed against her ribs, so loud she was sure they could hear it. "All of you up!" one guard barked, his voice cutting through the room like a blade. A few girls jerked upright immediately, tripping over their own legs in their panic. Another guard stepped forward, his face expressionless. "Stand," he commanded, colder, quieter, but somehow more terrifying. Helena stood slowly, her legs trembling from cold and fear. "Form a line," the third guard ordered. They obeyed. Helena moved into place, her bare feet freezing against the stone floor. She pulled her arms tighter around herself, but it didn't help. The cold seeped into her bones, into her core. Down the corridor, a voice echoed. Smooth, authoritative. "Bring them. The washing chamber is ready." The guards immediately moved, grabbing the nearest girl and shoving her toward the hallway. Helena stumbled forward as she was pushed from behind. The corridor ahead was narrow, lined with uneven torches that spat and hissed. Shadows jumped and stretched across the walls, twisting into monstrous shapes. Some girls whimpered softly. Some whispered broken prayers under their breath. Helena swallowed her fear, forcing herself not to make a sound. She had learned long ago that crying meant weakness, and weakness invited pain. With each step, the bitter scent of smoke and herbs grew stronger. Helena squinted ahead, and then she saw it. A large steel door, already open. Steam rolled out in thick, curling waves, licking at the torches as if it were alive. The washing chamber. Her stomach dropped. 2 older women in stiff gray uniforms waited inside, their eyes sharp and unforgiving. Next to them were buckets, brushes, cloths, and small clay jars filled with oil that smelled harsh and bitter. The guards pushed the girls through the doorway. Warm steam wrapped around Helena's body as she entered. But it wasn't comforting. It smelled like punishment, bitter herbs, acrid oils, and heat meant to discipline, not soothe. "Strip them," one woman snapped, her voice sharp enough to scratch stone. Before Helena could cover herself, a guard ripped the thin sheet she clung to. The air hit her bare skin, and shame burned her alive. Hands grabbed her wrists. She stumbled. Her feet slipped on the wet floor. A guard jerked her forward like she weighed nothing at all. She stood naked, exposed, every bruise from her past visible under the harsh light of the room's lanterns. Helena's breath shook. Mrs. Granger, though Helena didn't know her name yet, walked slowly down the line of new servants, her eyes cold and assessing. She didn't see girls. She saw objects. Her gaze landed on Helena. It stayed there. Mrs. Granger tilted her head. "Pretty face. Too pretty." Her lip curled. "Girls like you cause trouble." Helena dropped her eyes immediately, cheeks burning. Two attendants seized her wrists again and dragged her to a large circular basin filled with steaming water. Steam rose in thick clouds, almost choking her. Before she could brace herself, splash. Her face plunged into the water as they shoved her down. Helena choked, sucking in steam and soap. Her arms tried to push up but were forced back down. The sensation was suffocating. Heat, pressure, hands, roughness. Then came the brushes, hard, brutal, scraping brushes that tore over her skin without mercy. Her arms, her shoulders, her back, her legs. Each stroke felt like they were trying to erase her. Her teeth clenched so tight her jaw hurt. Tears stung her eyes, not from emotion, but from the pain. Every part of her stung. "Hold still," one attendant snapped as Helena's body flinched involuntarily. She tried. The cold water came next. A bucket dumped over her head so suddenly she gasped and coughed, water streaming down her face and chest. Another bucket. Then another. And another. Her hair grew heavy, plastered across her shoulders and cheeks. Her scalp burned from the harsh soap. Enough. Move her. Helena was dragged by her dripping hair. She cried out softly but bit the sound back. The attendants didn't care that her knee scraped the stone floor, tearing open a thin cut that immediately bled. They rubbed her dry roughly with coarse towels that scraped like sandpaper. When the towel brushed the fresh cuts on her knees, she winced, gripping the fabric of her arms. "Stand straight," the attendant snapped. Helena forced her spine upright, even though she was shaking visibly. Then came the garments. A thin chemise, cold and stiff against her skin, a rough brown dress, itchy, heavy, uncomfortable, a white apron, too tight around her chest, the royal crest bright and bold over her heart. She swallowed. She wasn't a girl anymore. Not a villager. Not Helena from Silverpine. She was a servant now. The attendants divided the girls into groups. "You," one woman pointed at Helena, "kitchen training." Another added, without even looking at her, "dining hall etiquette later. Don't embarrass us." Helena didn't respond. She just followed. The scent hit her before she reached the kitchen. Warm bread, spice broth, roasted meats, sizzling butter. Her stomach twisted so violently she had to wrap her arm around her waist to steady herself. She hadn't eaten since yesterday morning. The kitchen was massive, far larger than anything she'd ever seen. Fire pits glowed in corners, pots as large as bathtubs boiled over flames, and servants rushed around like frantic bees. Then Mrs. Granger entered, and every single person froze mid-step. Her presence sucked all sound from the room, leaving a suffocating stillness. "Girls," she announced, pacing slowly before them, "your lives belong to the royal family now." Her eyes burned through them. "You will obey. You will not speak unless spoken to. You will not eat unless permitted. And you will not question orders." Her gaze snapped to Helena, again. "And you, pretty face, don't think your looks will save you. Girls like you are trouble." She leaned close enough that Helena felt her breath against her cheek. "Don't give me a reason." Helena swallowed the humiliation forming like a knot in her throat. She lined up with the other girls and began her first task, scraping potatoes. Hours passed. Her fingers reddened, her nails lined with dirt, her palms burned, her shoulders ached. Faster, a cook barked. She obeyed. Not like that. You're wasting food. She adjusted. Are you deaf? Faster. Her hands trembled. She pushed through it. By midday, her apron was stained brown and yellow. By late afternoon, her arms were numb. By evening, her breath felt heavy, her feet swollen, her spine stiff. Mrs. Granger returned. Silence fell instantly. She walked slowly down the line of new servants, inspecting their progress like a general inspecting soldiers. Her steps stopped in front of Helena. "What's your name?" she demanded. "Helena," she whispered. "Speak louder. Helena." Mrs. Granger scoffed. "Infertile, wolfless Helena. The one from Silver Pine Village." Helena froze. The words cut deep, deeper than any injury today had inflicted. Her chest constricted painfully. The rumors, the whispers, even here people knew. Mrs. Granger smirked, a cruel glint in her eyes. "You're lucky you have a pretty face, because otherwise you'd be worthless. A burden even to your parents." Helena swallowed the pain, forcing her voice steady. "Yes, ma'am. She listens," Mrs. Granger muttered. "Good. You'll need that." After hours of work, Helena was sent to clean the lower dining hall. The tables stretched endlessly. The floors needed scrubbing 3 times. The water jugs were heavy. Her arms shook with each bucket she carried. Eventually, she stepped outside to dump a bucket of dirty water and froze. A tall palace guard leaned against the wall. Kane. He hadn't spoken much earlier, but Helena had noticed him. His presence was different from the others. Calmer, sharper, not cruel. He studied her now, eyes narrowing slightly. "You look like you were about to fall over." Helena tightened her grip on the bucket. "I'm fine," she murmured. "You're shaking. I'm just cold." "You're sweating," he countered calmly. She lowered her eyes. She didn't know how to respond. Then he moved, slowly, not threatening, pulling something from his belt pouch, a small loaf of bread, warm, wrapped in cloth. Helena's breath caught. Her stomach tightened painfully, her mouth watered without permission. "You should eat," Kane said simply. "I'm not allowed. I'm not asking." He pressed the bread into her hands. "Eat." Hunger overpowered obedience. She took a bite, warm, soft, salty, perfect. Tears gathered in her eyes before she could stop them. No one had fed her like this. No one had ever looked at her and thought she deserved kindness. When she finished, her voice trembled. "Why did you help me?" Kane shrugged. Simple, matter of fact. "You look like someone who doesn't deserve what's happening to you." Emotion swelled in her chest. "Thank you," she whispered. Kane didn't smile, but something softened in his gaze. "If you need anything, ask me," he said. "I'm usually stationed near the eastern gate." Her heart jumped. She knew that gate. It led to the woods. The woods led to... Chris. Hope hit her like a tidal wave. Later that night, when all servants were asleep, Helena whispered through the dim hallway. "Kane?" He turned, recognizing her voice instantly. She took small steps toward him, fear and desperation trembling through her. "Please," she whispered. "I need to see my brother. He's little. He's alone. They'll hurt him. I have to check on him." Kane's jaw tightened. "You're not allowed to leave the grounds." "I know," she whispered, voice cracking. "But I'll be quick, please. I'll do anything, anything." Something in his expression shifted. Conflict, reluctance, sympathy. Then... "Fine," Helena gasped softly. "But," Kane said sternly, "you must bring meals for the gate guards every time you sneak out. If they have reason to like you, they'll look away." Helena nodded rapidly. "Yes, I'll sneak food. I'll cook. Whatever they want. Be at the eastern gate tomorrow after dusk." Kane said. I'll distract the others. Relief nearly buckled her knees. Thank you, she whispered. Kane stepped aside, letting her pass back toward the sleeping quarters. Rest now, he murmured. Tomorrow will be long. Helena curled onto her thin mat, her body throbbing, her hands scratched and raw, but for the first time since being dragged from Duskwind. She smiled. Tomorrow she would see Chris. Tomorrow she wouldn't be alone. Her eyelids grew heavy as exhaustion pulled her under, and she drifted into sleep, dreaming of holding her little brother again. The moon hung low like a silent witness as Helena followed Kane down a narrow side corridor, her heart beating a frantic rhythm beneath her plain palace blouse. He didn't speak, he rarely did, but he moved with purpose, each step echoing with authority and the kind of danger only he carried with ease. When they reached the eastern gates of the palace, Kane glanced around once, twice, then jerked his chin. Stay close. Helena swallowed and did as he said. Outside the kingdom walls, the air shifted, lighter, colder, painfully familiar. The scent of pine and damp earth made her chest tighten. Home, the forest trail she once walked barefoot, now felt like a forgotten dream. They walked in silence for minutes that felt like hours, until Kane finally stopped near a fallen log. He looked at her, eyes glinting in the silver moonlight. Go, he's waiting. Her breath trembled. Chris? He didn't answer. He didn't need to. Helena darted forward, her feet flying over the leaves, and there, beneath, the crooked birch, stood her little brother. Smaller, thinner, eyes too wide, too scared. Lena. She dropped to her knees, pulling him into her arms before the world could steal another piece of her. For a moment, she forgot the palace, forgot the servants, forgot the cold eyes of Mrs. Granger and the harsh rules. She only held Chris, whispered promises, pressed her forehead to his messy hair. I'm sorry, she choked. I'm so sorry I left you. You didn't leave. Chris's voice shook. They sold you. Her tears fell harder. They spoke quietly, hurriedly. Chris told her about their parents' worsening cruelty. Helena begged him to stay alive for her. They exchanged a carved wooden wolf. Kane had quietly slipped into her pocket earlier, claiming it might comfort the boy. But soon, footsteps approached, the strict, heavy cadence of Kane. Time's up. Helena tightened her grip on Chris one final time before kissing the top of his head. I'll come back, she whispered. I swear it. Chris nodded bravely, though he trembled like a leaf. Kane stood a few feet away, arms crossed, his expression unreadable. But his eyes softened when he saw Helena wiping her tears. The walk back was quiet, too quiet. Helena's emotions were still raw, her heart torn between guilt and fleeting joy. Halfway through the forest, Kane suddenly stopped. Helena looked up at him, confused. Kane? Is something wrong? He exhaled, long and controlled, a man preparing to reveal something he rarely shared. Helena, he said quietly, I need you to understand something. The wind rustled through the trees. I don't do this for servants. I don't risk myself for anyone, not unless the king commands it. She blinked, startled. But the king, he never asked you to help me. No, Kane confirmed, voice rough. He didn't. She stared at him, heart pounding. Then, why? Kane stepped closer, shadows crawling over his sharp features. Because before I am anything else, before I am a warrior or a general, he pressed his hand to his chest, I am the king's beta. The forest felt suddenly colder, and to serve the king, he continued, I have gone to extreme lengths, bloody lengths. His eyes glowed faintly wolf-like. If he asked me to burn a village, I would. If he ordered someone dead, they wouldn't live past sunrise. Helena swallowed hard. Kane towered over her, not threatening but painfully honest. I need you to know, he said, voice dropping to a whisper, that helping you is the first thing I've done that wasn't for duty. But if the king ever commanded your punishment, his jaw tightened, I would obey. Helena felt the truth like a knife. Sharp, cold, inevitable. And Helena? Kane's expression hardened. If he ever finds out about tonight, I won't be able to protect you. Her breath caught. He stepped aside, gesturing toward the hidden palace path. Walk. And as they headed back under the ghostly moonlight, Helena realized something terrifying. Kane wasn't warning her. He was preparing her. Chapter 3. The King in the Garden. The first thing Helena learned in the palace was that the king was not a man you saw. He was a man you felt, a shadow that passed just out of sight, a cold gust of wind that swept through the corridor long before footsteps followed, a presence that weighed on the air so heavily the walls themselves seemed to hold their breath. People spoke of him like a specter, not a sovereign. King Arthur moves differently, the senior servants whispered, when they thought no one was listening. Not like other royals, silent as smoke, has eyes everywhere. He can appear behind you without a sound. Helena believed it. She had felt it herself. Whenever she entered the long hallways with her mop and wooden pail rattling against her ankles, she would catch only the faintest glimpse of something dark, a shape, a flutter of black cloak disappearing around a stone corner, a shadow that should not have been there, and yet was. She never heard footsteps, never heard breathing, never heard the rustle of a cape, only the sudden pressure of air shifting, the echo of authority lingering like a scent, and always, she was pulled back before she got too close. The first time it happened, she had been carrying a tray stacked with clean cups, balancing them carefully as she pushed the swinging door to the upper kitchen. A hand clamped around her shoulder and yanked her back so hard she stumbled. Not you, the headmaid hissed. Step aside. Before Helena could speak, a sharp clap echoed through the room. Positions! Maids rushed in from every direction, dropping instantly to their knees, heads touching the ground. Helena pressed herself into the far shadow of the wall, heart hammering in her chest, unsure if she was supposed to kneel or vanish. She wasn't given time to decide. Heavy boots began walking down the corridor outside. Slow, measured, a rhythm of command. Helena's breath caught as the steps passed directly beside the open kitchen door. She stared down at the stone floor, daring not even blink, but she didn't need to look up to know. That was him, the king. The air changed when he passed. Thicker, quieter, tighter, a presence that felt like a storm wearing a cloak. And yet she didn't raise her head. No one did. No one was allowed. When the footsteps faded, the maids rose in perfect unison, exhaling as if they had been suffocating. Helena remained frozen for several seconds before the headmaid snapped at her to move. Her hands shook the rest of the day. Because she had not seen him, not even the hem of his cloak, but she felt him, felt danger, felt power. Felt the weight of someone who could silence a room simply by existing. And for the naturally curious Helena, not seeing him was torture. Who was this king? Was he cruel like her parents? Gentle like Chris? Distant? Unstable? Cold? Broken? Or was he something else entirely? Something no rumor could capture? She had no answers, only questions. Questions she wasn't brave enough or foolish enough to pursue. Because Mrs. Granger reminded her daily, "You are too low to even breathe near him. Stay out of sight." And Helena did, mostly, but she couldn't stop wondering. Days melted into each other. The palace was enormous, a maze of marble halls and archways lit by golden sconces. Servants moved through it like ants, quiet, fast, organized. Helena worked among them, invisible despite her blonde hair, slipping through the busyness with her mop sloshing and her bucket creaking, sweeping, scrubbing, carrying baskets twice her weight, running up and down staircases until her legs trembled. But the worst duties were the late-night ones. They always came when her body was already exhausted, bones aching, fingers numb, eyelids heavy. And, of course, Mrs. Granger had been waiting for the perfect moment to strike. "You," she snapped one evening, jabbing a long finger toward Helena. "Tonight's garden shifts. The east wing." Helena's heart plummeted into her stomach. Garden shifts meant only one thing: wolfsbane. She froze. Her lungs tightened. She had heard stories even before the palace. Stories of wolves burning just from brushing against it. Stories of warriors screaming as the poison spread through their veins. Stories of deaths. "Ma'am," Helena whispered shakily, "won't it burn?" Mrs. Granger tilted her head with a mocking smile. "Yes. And that is exactly why you will do it." Helena swallowed. Hard. I'm wolfless," she murmured. "It shouldn't hurt as much." Mrs. Granger stepped close. Too close. Her breath touched Helena's cheek like a cold slap. "You think I care? You are tainted enough that it won't kill you. It will only sting." She straightened, voice icy. "Get moving. Do not come back until every stem is trimmed." The room fell silent. No servant offered comfort. No one dared challenge Mrs. Granger. Helena walked into the night alone. The palace garden was a different world at night. In daylight it was stunning, one of the kingdom's wonders, but in darkness it was something else entirely. Silver light from the moon cast the hedges in soft shadows. Lanterns glowed like floating orbs. Fountains whispered secrets into the air. The scent of night flowers drifted around her like a veil. Sweet, cool, mysterious. Helena stepped onto the stone path, shoes crunching lightly over gravel. Despite her fear, she couldn't deny the beauty. For a moment, she allowed herself to breathe, to feel something other than pain, other than worry, other than the constant ache of being unwanted. But the far corner of the garden, the east wing, waited for her, and that corner was deadly. As she approached the wolfsbane patch, she felt her stomach twist. The violet flowers glowed faintly, almost unnaturally, as if born from moonlight instead of soil. She knelt, her knees dug into the cold earth. She slipped on the worn gloves Mrs. Granger gave her, thin as paper. She reached out. The instant her fingers touched a stem, a scorching burn shot up her arm like lightning. She gasped and yanked her hand back, her skin already reddened, blistering, angry. Helena squeezed her eyes shut. "You can do this. You have to. For Chris. For both of you. For survival." She forced her shaking hands forward again. Stem by stem, she plucked the flowers, dropping them into the basket. Each touch sent fresh agony through her arms. Sometimes she whimpered. Sometimes she bit her lip until she tasted blood. But she kept going. Silence wrapped around her like a shroud. Too quiet, too heavy. So she hummed. A small sound at first, barely audible, just enough to make the night feel less empty. Then she began to sing, a lullaby, her mother's lullaby, the one she used to sing to Chris when he was small and scared, before everything broke. Her voice trembled, wavered, cracked with memory. She stopped, but the weight of the night and her loneliness pressed harder. So Helena began again, stronger, fuller, filled with sorrow and strength. Her voice lifted into the darkness like a soft ribbon of warmth. It didn't matter that she had no training. It didn't matter that she was exhausted. It was the only thing she had. She sang, and she didn't know someone was listening. Chapter 4. The Accidental Encounter. Helena did not see him, not the tall figure sitting in the shadows, cape draped around his shoulders, elbow resting casually on his bent knee as though he belonged to the night itself. She did not see how his wolf, the creature that lurked like coiled lightning within him, finally settled peacefully, lulled by her song. She did not see that the king, her king, had chosen this secluded corner of the palace gardens over a gala of gilded nobles and grand halls, just to hear her voice. Every night thereafter, Helena tended the wolfsbane. Every night Mrs. Granger sent her out, deliberately punishing her, testing her endurance. Every night, her hands burned, blistered, and stung as though tiny flames were licking her skin. And every night, Arthur listened, unseen, silent, moved. Her voice, her pain, her quiet, unyielding strength. It became the only thing that soothed him. He did not know her name. He did not know her past. He did not understand why the sound of her singing cut so deeply into his chest, why the vibration of her voice stirred something long dead in him. But he knew one thing. He would return tomorrow, and the night after, and the night after that, because something about that girl, something about the way she sang as if fighting the world with nothing but hope, it awakened something fierce inside him, something he thought had died long ago. A week later, Helena had learned the rhythm of her life in the palace, though hated it with every fiber of her being. The sun rose, flooding the stone halls and tall windows with a cold yet almost hopeful light. Daytime was for scrubbing floors until her knees screamed, for hauling buckets heavier than her arms could manage, for listening to Mrs. Granger's sharp voice cut through corridors like a whip made of ice, and for pretending not to notice the furtive glances of other servants, the pitying ones, the jealous ones, the curious ones. But nighttime was different. Nighttime was for pain. The wolfsbane awaited her, purple flames against the black of night, a flower that should have ignored her entirely since she was wolfless, yet instead burned her as though her blood remembered secrets her body did not. Mrs. Granger called her weak. The other servants whispered she was cursed. Helena only kept going. For Chris, for the dream of freedom, for herself. Tonight, however, felt different. The moon hung heavy above the palace gardens, brushing silver across the hedges and fountains. Clouds drifted lazily, hinting at the frost of winter yet to come. The palace behind her glowed warmly, spilling music, laughter, and muffled conversation into the gardens. Drunken nobles staggered past open windows, their voices bouncing across marble corridors. And yet Helena walked toward the farthest garden near the east wing, basket in hand, heart braced against the familiar sting of the flower bed waiting for her. Purple clusters of wolfsbane glimmered faintly like lanterns caught in a gentle wind. Helena paused, inhaling deeply. "All right," she whispered to herself. "Just don't burn too badly tonight." She knelt. The first stem she touched seared her fingers instantly, red streaks blooming across her skin. She gasped. She winced, and then, to quiet the voice in her head, the panic in her chest, the fire crawling up her arms, she began to hum. Softly at first, barely audible, a gentle thread weaving through the night air. Her voice rose slowly, warming, wrapping the garden in something almost tangible. She did not know he was there. Not yet. Arthur in the shadows. He leaned against the trunk of an ancient willow, half hidden beneath its drooping branches. His cape draped loosely, blending into the darkness around him. He had slipped out of the ballroom when the advisor's attention had wandered, guards trailing far enough not to intrude, respecting his unspoken need for solitude. He wanted peace, and he found it here. Here where the girl sang, the girl whose song had entered his dreams and thoughts lingering in the crevices of his mind. Her voice softened tonight. Sadness wound around each note like smoke curling through the air. Arthur frowned. "She's hurting," he muttered. Inside him, the wolf stirred. "We should go to her." Arthur almost laughed, a bitter little sound. "We don't even know her," he whispered back. "She sings like us," his wolf insisted, "like someone who carries pain." Arthur said nothing, merely watched. Her blonde hair escaped from the braid at her nape, glowing silver in the moonlight. Her skin was pale and flawless despite the reddening of her arms, and every time she touched the wolfsbane, she flinched and bit back a sound. "Why is she doing this alone?" he murmured, one step forward. A tiny shift in the gravel beneath his boot. That was the mistake, the encounter. Helena spun at the sound of gravel underfoot. Her foot slipped. She stumbled backward into the basket. The basket tipped violently. Purple blooms scattered across the garden path. and onto Arthur," he hissed, sharp and involuntary. The burning sensation spread immediately, as though the flowers had recognized him. "Oh, I'm so sorry, sir!" Helena rushed forward instinctively. "Are you hurt? I didn't. Please don't be mad." Her bare hands brushed the flowers from his sleeve. Arthur raised a hand to stop her, but too late. Helena's knee hit the basket, and she lost her balance completely. She fell into him. The world narrowed to the searing heat of wolfsbane, the crash of her body against his chest, and then her eyes, blue, wide, panicked, shimmering in the moonlight. The pain vanished. The world stopped. Arthur could do nothing but stare. She was beautiful, not in the delicate, fragile sense courtiers fawned over, but alive, raw, forged in fire. Helena scrambled away, red-faced and flustered. "Oh, gods, I didn't mean... Your clothes? Your robes? Twice. I'm terrible." Arthur blinked, finally finding his voice. "I'm fine," he said softly. Helena, still kneeling, attempted to gather the flowers. No, don't," he started. "Yes, right, sorry," she interrupted herself, halting immediately. She pressed her palms to her face. "This is the worst night of my life," she mumbled. Arthur almost smiled at her candor. "What are you doing out so late?" he asked gently. She exhaled, exhausted. "Punishment duty," she replied. Arthur's jaw tightened. "Punishment? For what?" "Mrs. Granger sends me to harvest wolfsbane every night," she explained. "It burns wolves, but apparently it burns me too." Arthur's eyes fell to her hands, red, blistering, trembling. Inside, his wolf snarled softly. "She's being hurt. Fix it. Protect her." Arthur swallowed. "And who gave you such a cruel task?" he asked, voice sharper than intended. Helena shrugged. "The head overseer. She hates me." He clenched his jaw. Helena dipped her head respectfully. "Forgive me, sir. I didn't mean to ramble," she whispered. "Are you... well, you don't seem like a guard." "I'm not," he said simply. "A noble advisor?" she guessed, eyeing his fine robes. "Something like that," he replied vaguely. Helena's eyes widened. "Oh, well, good. I'd hate to think I assaulted someone important." Arthur felt a flicker of amusement he barely recognized. Chapter 5. The king stops coming. Arthur held back a laugh. If only she knew, when the awkward panic of the garden encounter finally subsided. Helena and Arthur stood upright, brushing off the dust and scattered petals of wolfsbane that had clung stubbornly to their clothes. The moonlight was soft against the leaves, casting silvery shadows that danced along the garden paths. But the warmth of embarrassment and the sting of the wolfsbane still lingered on Helena's skin. "Let me help you pick up the basket," Arthur offered, his voice careful as if he feared startling her again. She froze instantly, her wide blue eyes flicked toward him, panic brimming in every subtle tremor of her frame. Then, as if deciding to flee from propriety itself, she shook her head frantically. "No, sir. You don't have to. I mean, you shouldn't. Your clothes are too fine. Men like you aren't supposed to touch servant tools." Arthur raised a brow, the corner of his mouth twitching in amusement. "I think my hands can handle it," he replied lightly, the calm authority in his voice only accentuating the quiet intimacy of the moment. Helena's cheeks burned crimson. She moved quickly to resume picking up the scattered wolfsbane, but Arthur's hands were already on the basket, steadying it. Their fingers brushed just slightly. She recoiled as though struck by lightning, a jolt running through her entire body. Arthur noticed the reaction. He filed it away silently, pretending indifference. Together, though mostly him, they gathered the flowers, returning each to the basket with care. When Helena finally held the basket to her chest, she dipped her head slightly in a gesture of humility and gratitude. "Thank you, advisor," she murmured softly. Arthur allowed himself a small, private smile. "No need for titles. You may call me Arthur." Her eyes widened. the innocence and guileless trust shining in them. Arthur? That's the king's name. A very common name, he said smoothly, letting the lie drift over them like a quiet, comforting shadow. She nodded without suspicion, her faith in him unshaken. Well, thank you, Arthur. Truly, something warm and unexpectedly tender bloomed in his chest. He shouldn't feel this. He didn't know her. She was a servant. Their lives were bound by different laws, different worlds. Their paths could never intertwine. And yet, walk with me, he said suddenly, voice low and inviting, almost hesitant but firm. She blinked, startled. Walk. With you? Just for a little while, he added quickly. If you don't mind. Helena hesitated. Every instinct, every lesson of obedience and class whispering in her ears urged her to refuse. Servants did not walk the gardens with nobles. Not at night. It was improper, suspicious, dangerous. Yet, as she gazed into the quiet sincerity of his eyes, as she felt the pull of the moment, the gentle invitation, she found herself nodding. All right, she whispered, and together they walked. The conversation flowed with surprising ease, a gentle current beneath the quiet night. So, Arthur began, You sing. Helena flushed, a faint warmth spreading across her pale cheeks. Not on purpose. It just helps with the burning. Distracts me. It's beautiful, he said softly, admiration threading through his voice. She stumbled for a heartbeat. You heard me? Every night, he said, eyes steady on hers. Her face pinkened, a blend of embarrassment and pleasure. Oh gods, she whispered. You have a gift, he added gently, almost reverently. No, I just like the sound of something gentle in a world that isn't, she admitted. Her words were quiet, fragile, yet resolute. Arthur blinked, surprised at the depth of her response. And what world is that? A world where people like me get punished for breathing wrong, she sighed, a bitter weight settling on her shoulders. A world where kings make laws that take girls and boys away from their families if the parents can't pay tax. Arthur's jaw stiffened imperceptibly. She went on, her words flowing freely, completely unaware she was speaking to the king himself. Imagine that. Imagine a king so heartless he thinks that's fair. Taking people like they're sacks of grain. Who does that? What kind of person does that make him? Arthur swallowed, his chest tight. Helena's blue eyes flashed with an intensity he had not expected. I'll tell you who. A king who has no idea how people suffer. Or worse, doesn't care. Arthur remained silent. He could not defend himself. He could not reveal the truth. Not now, not like this. And yet he listened, truly listened, allowing her words to pierce him deeper than any royal report, any counsel, any throne room argument ever could. It must be difficult, he murmured gently, to be taken from home. Helena's expression softened, her anger slowly dissolving into grief, leaving behind the barest trace of vulnerability. My little brother is still there, she whispered. Chris, he's 10. They left him alone with them. They're his parents but don't care if he eats well or even if he's sick. Her voice cracked, a fragile note of sorrow that tugged at Arthur's heart. I miss him every moment, she breathed, every breath. He's the only person I ever had. Arthur wanted desperately to reach out, to touch her hand, to promise her everything she'd lost, to tell her that she was safe now, but he didn't. And yet the desire burned in him like a second sun, consuming and relentless. They reached the fountain at the garden's center, the water catching moonlight in delicate ripples, casting dancing silver patterns onto the stones surrounding them. Helena sat on the edge without a word, her movements careful, deliberate. Arthur stood for a long moment, watching her, before quietly joining her side. I'm sorry, she murmured suddenly, looking down. I'm talking too much. You probably have far more important matters to deal with. Arthur shook his head gently. I don't mind. he said. "I enjoy hearing you speak." Helena's eyes widened in surprise. "Really?" He nodded. "You're refreshing." She frowned. "Refreshing. Honest," he corrected softly. "And brave." Helena laughed quietly, a small musical sound in the night air. "I don't feel brave." "Bravery often feels like fear," he said firmly, "but you keep going anyway." She looked down at her blistered, reddened hands, covering them with trembling fingers. "Even now?" "Yes," he said, voice steady, "especially now." She looked up, meeting his gaze. For a heartbeat, time slowed. The wind rustled the willow branches, the moonlight danced over the fountain's rippling surface, and for a fleeting instant, the world beyond the garden ceased to exist. Arthur could feel it, a pull, warm, dangerous, unavoidable. Had destiny begun weaving something between them? Helena smiled shyly, breaking the spell of silence. "Well, thank you." "I think you're nice, Arthur." He nearly choked at the simplicity, the innocence, the rawness of her words. Nice? No one ever called a king nice. And gods help him. He liked hearing it from her. He cleared his throat lightly. "You should finish your duties and head back before someone notices you're missing." "Oh!" Helena jolted. Yes, you're right." She rose quickly. Arthur followed, keeping pace silently beside her. "Will you be here tomorrow night?" she asked timidly, then winced. I mean, if you're not busy." Arthur smiled, a slow, quiet smile that held more than words could capture. "Yes." Her eyes lit up with a spark he would never forget. "Good night, Arthur." She hurried off, braid swaying behind her like a comet's tail, the basket of wolfsbane cradled in her arms. Arthur watched her until she disappeared into the shadows. When she was gone, he finally exhaled, letting the tension of the night melt away. His wolf growled softly, a low, satisfied rumble. "She is ours." Arthur closed his eyes. "No," he murmured aloud, but the truth was undeniable. He already wanted to see her again, and he would tomorrow night, and the night after, and the next, because the accidental encounter had changed everything. For her, for him, for the kingdom. Yet Helena, innocent and unaware, had spent an hour walking and speaking with the man she despised, the king himself. Days later, the gardens felt different, quieter, colder, lonelier. Helena stood beneath the moonlit arch of ivy, her private sanctuary of hope and escape. Each night she had anticipated the arrival of the man she believed to be a noble advisor. But tonight, for the 7th night in a row, she was alone. Her basket of wolfsbane sat heavily at her feet. Her palms, wrapped to hide the burns, ached with familiar pain. "Maybe he's just busy," she whispered to the roses, trying to convince herself. Maybe he's traveling. Yet the silence pressed down, insistent and heavy. He would have said something before leaving. Always. Now nothing. Helena closed her eyes, swallowing against the ache in her chest. Pain is familiar. Pain is nothing. She bent down, resuming her harvest of wolfsbane. Each cut, each burn, reminded her of her parents' harshness, Chris's small, desperate cries, the loneliness that never left her side, and the absence of the man in the garden tore at her as well. The summoning. 2 nights later, Helena sat on her straw mattress in the servant quarters, finally freeing her blistered hands from their cloth wrappings when the iron latch of the door slammed open with a metallic clang. Her heart jumped. General Kane's towering silhouette filled the doorway, torchlight flickering behind him. "Kane?" Helena stammered. What are you doing here?" "He never came to the female servant quarters. Ever. Get up!" She obeyed instantly. Fear threaded through every movement. "You're needed tonight," Kane said simply, voice like steel. Helena's stomach dropped. "For what?" He didn't answer. Instead, he gestured sharply toward the door. "Go to the royal kitchen. Tell the cooks you're under my orders. They will give you what you need." Her hands grew clammy. "What exactly am I supposed to get?" "Food," Kane said bluntly. "Freshly cut meat. And you will bring it to me at midnight." Her mouth went dry. "Why me?" His gaze sharpened dangerously. "Did you just question an order?" "No, but Kane, why are you doing this?" she replied quickly, shaking her head. "Good. Midnight. Do not be late." Before she could process further, he added, "Oh, and wear white." Helena's confusion deepened, but she remained silent as Kane departed, the torchlight fading with his presence. Midnight. Fresh meat. White clothing. Her heart raced with a mixture of fear and curiosity. Whispers followed her like ghosts as she navigated the palace corridors, her hands aching and her mind spinning. The head cook handed her a massive silver platter piled with freshly cut, still warm meat. She could barely lift it, muscles trembling. White fabric was thrust into her arms, simple, clean, mysterious. She obeyed, though every step felt heavier than the last. The palace was a labyrinth of shadows. Helena followed Kane through unfamiliar passages, down spiral staircases that seemed to go on forever. The air grew cold, damp, and heavy with each step. At last, they arrived in a vast stone chamber. Torches flickered, casting long shadows across the massive iron door that stretched impossibly high, bound in chains. Her pulse raced. "Kane," she whispered, "what is this place?" "Silence," he commanded. The massive key turned with a groan. The door creaked, cold air rushing over her arms. Kane gestured. "Go in." Helena froze. "No, I haven't done anything wrong. I am a servant, not a criminal." Soldiers emerged. Her pleas fell on deaf ears. She was dragged across the threshold. The platter clattered beside her. The door slammed. Boom. She was alone. The cold seeped into her bones. The darkness swallowed her. She pressed her shaking hands to her face and sobbed. This was only the beginning. Chapter 6. The red eyes in the dark. The dungeon was not merely a room. It was alive. Every stone, every crack, every shadow seemed to breathe, to shift, to watch. The air was heavy, thick with the scent of iron and dampness, and Helena felt as though each inhalation drew the chill into her very marrow. The small, high window was nothing but a cruel tease, thin fingers of cold moonlight barely reaching the stone floor, leaving more darkness than light. And the darkness, oh, the darkness. It slithered along the walls, pooling in corners, stretching toward her like living, hungry tendrils. Helena pressed herself into the farthest corner she could find, knees drawn tightly against her chest, arms wrapped around her trembling body. The platter of meat she had carried with so much effort lay abandoned at her feet, forgotten in the overwhelming terror that gripped her. Her burned hands throbbed as though protesting every second, but the pain was lost in comparison to the dread suffocating her heart. Her thoughts spiraled out of control. Chris, her little brother, alone, afraid, helpless. Did he even remember her? Did he know she loved him? Did he know she had tried to fight the cruel world for him and failed? The thought twisted her stomach into knots. She imagined him huddled in the corner of their old home, trying to make sense of the cold world outside the broken windows, feeling abandoned by those who should have protected him. Tears burned at the corners of her eyes, blurring the faint silver moonlight into watery streaks that seemed to tremble with her fear. "Chris," she whispered, voice breaking. I'm sorry, I'm so sorry you're alone." Her whisper became a choking sob that reverberated off the stone walls, echoing back to her with cruel insistence. The dungeon seemed to respond, swallowing her cries, amplifying her isolation. Each heartbeat thudded like a war drum in her chest. Each inhalation felt as though it were scraping her lungs raw. Each exhale pulled colder air deeper into her bones. The oppressive stillness pressed against her like a living weight, making her spine ache, making her hair stand on end. And then, movement. She froze mid-breath, eyes wide, heart threatening to shatter her ribs. At first she thought the shifting shadows had tricked her. Perhaps exhaustion and terror had conjured something imaginary. But no, there it was. Two glowing crimson eyes burning through the darkness, fixed directly on her, piercing her very soul. Her blood ran cold, every nerve on fire. Her stomach lurched violently, her throat tightening, her voice caught somewhere between scream and gasp. She tripped backward over her own trembling feet, arms flailing to protect herself. "No, no, no, no," she whispered, desperation overtaking reason. "Stay away from me." The red eyes did not blink, they did not waver. They simply glared at her, unflinching, unmoving, and completely devoid of mercy. Helena felt as if they were assessing her, measuring her worth, reading her fear like an open scroll. Her mind raced, her breath caught, her instincts screamed. Every horror story, every shadowed corner of memory, every nightmare she had ever feared manifested before her. Helena scrambled backward along the jagged stone wall, hands scraping against rough surfaces, fingertips bleeding slightly as the cold stone seemed intent on trapping her. Every stone, every crack, every shadow felt alive with malice, pressing against her as if eager to pull her into the abyss. Sobs tore from her chest uncontrollably. The dungeon seemed infinite, its boundaries stretching into incomprehensible darkness. Every escape route she imagined dissolved into the shadows before her eyes. She realized she had nowhere to run, nowhere to hide. Her mind spun wildly with questions, fears, and hopeless imaginings. The red eyes advanced, slowly, deliberately, each movement measured, each step deliberate. Helena shrank against the wall, pressing herself further into the corner, willing herself to disappear, to melt into the shadows. She whispered frantic, desperate prayers to the moon goddess, prayers she didn't remember learning but somehow knew. "Oh, moon goddess, protect my little brother, keep him safe. If I die tonight, let him survive, please." The red eyes tilted slightly, almost as if the creature itself was considering her words. A guttural, vibrating growl rolled through the dungeon, rattling stones, shaking her very bones, filling her chest with an icy fear she could not escape. Her knees buckled, chest heaving with sobs. Every instinct screamed at her, flee, hide, fight, but there was nowhere to go and no strength left to resist. And then she understood. It was a wolf. But not a normal wolf. Its size, the sheer intensity of its eyes, the bone-rattling growl. It was something older, stronger, more dangerous than any mortal beast she had ever known. Helena's terror deepened when she noticed the massive iron cuffs that chained the wolf's paws to the stone floor. Heavy iron that gleamed faintly in the slivers of moonlight, thick as tree branches. The chains strained under the wolf's power, each muscle ripple a threat to her fragile existence. Yet, in that realization, a flicker of relief sparked within her heart. The creature could not reach her here, in the farthest corner, away from the reach of its claws and jaws. A shuddering breath escaped her lips. I might survive." The wolf shifted, low growls vibrating through the dungeon, advancing toward the platter of meat. Its colossal jaws descended on the feast, tearing into the raw flesh with terrifying precision, red eyes never leaving her. Each motion of the wolf was predatory perfection. Muscles coiled, fur bristling, the air around it charged with power. The sound of tearing meat echoed through the chamber, magnifying her isolation and terror. Every shadow seemed to pulse, to inch closer, eager to consume her. Helena's trembling worsened, her soaked cheeks streaked with dried tears. Every inch of her being screamed for her to run, to disappear, to escape, but there was nowhere to go. She could only hug her knees tighter, curling into herself, willing herself invisible, hoping beyond hope that the creature's red gaze would lose interest in her. I'm sorry," she whispered, voice cracking. "Please, don't kill me." The wolf paused, head tilting slightly, assessing her from the darkness. A low snarl, deep and menacing, vibrated through the floor and into her chest. Helena's body shook violently. She squeezed her eyes shut, whispering again, barely audible, "Please, keep Chris safe. Let me live." Time became meaningless. Hours stretched like centuries, or perhaps only minutes passed. It was impossible to tell. Every breath Helena drew was a battle. Every heartbeat thundered in her ears. The cold, the darkness, the red eyes, the omnipresent, living dread of the dungeon. It all merged into a suffocating, unending torment. She cried until exhaustion claimed her, until tears dried on her cheeks and streaks of salt and shadow painted her face. Every muscle in her body trembled uncontrollably. The chill seeped into her very bones, gnawing at her with unrelenting persistence. Every instinct begged her to run, to flee, to fight. But her body betrayed her, succumbing to the oppressive weight of terror and fatigue. And finally, her consciousness faltered. Her eyelids fluttered once, twice, and then surrendered to the darkness. She collapsed into herself, stone pressing against her burned skin, knees still drawn tight to her chest, arms wrapped around her trembling form. The last sensations she felt were the faint sound of the wolf tearing into the meat, the chill of the stone pressing cold against her flesh, and the unblinking, terrifying glow of those red eyes, watching, waiting, judging. The dungeon swallowed Helena completely, her screams, her tears, her prayers, all absorbed by the living darkness. Every shadow seemed to pulse with anticipation. And in the deepest corner, the wolf remained, red eyes unrelenting, a silent guardian or a merciless predator. Helena could not yet tell. It waited, coiled, patient, a monstrous force tethered but not defeated. And Helena, lost to the suffocating cold, the endless black, and the monstrous crimson stare, finally succumbed to unconsciousness. The dungeon had claimed her body, but her spirit, fragile and trembling, had only just begun its ordeal. And somewhere in that darkness, the red eyes never blinked. Chapter 7. The Threat. The morning sunlight slashed through the narrow window, harsh and unforgiving, burning into Helena's eyelids even before she had the strength to open them fully. Her eyes fluttered, hesitant, heavy with exhaustion and tears, catching first the outline of the room before focusing on the figures looming over her like living shadows pulled straight from nightmares. The air was thick, heavy with the scent of wax smoke from the torches still smoldering in the corners and the metallic tang of fear that clung to her chest as though someone had pressed it there with intent. Her muscles recoiled automatically, back arching, shoulders tensing as she instinctively tried to shrink into herself. Every inch of her body screamed to escape, to vanish from this oppressive presence. Her voice was fragile, brittle, trembling like the last leaves of autumn clinging to their branches. "Stay away," she whispered, the words almost lost to the heavy air, but each syllable carried the weight of terror and defiance fused together. Her heart hammered with a relentless intensity, each beat a reminder that she was still alive, still tethered to this cruel world, but just barely. The shadow of General Kane stretched across the floor as he stepped closer. The echo of his boots against the wooden planks was rhythmic, predatory, each tap a statement of control. He was rigid, unmoving except for the slow, deliberate approach, his eyes cold pools of judgment that froze her from the inside out. The contours of his face remained unreadable, yet every nuance of his posture screamed of authority, of danger, of a threat that left no room for negotiation. "Never," Kane said slowly, his voice cutting through the morning silence, like a sharp-edged blade slicing silk. "Ever speak a word about what you saw last night. One word, and your brother will pay for it." Helena's stomach lurched violently, the words sinking into her like venom. Her lungs constricted, burning with panic that clawed up her throat. Fear wrapped around her ribcage like iron bands, each breath a struggle against the rising tide of terror. The possibility that Chris, her little brother, her anchor, her reason, could suffer because of her own existence made bile rise in her throat. Panic clawed at her like a living creature. "No, Kane, please. Why? I didn't do anything wrong. What have I done to deserve this?" Her voice rose, raw and shaking, piercing the stale air of the chamber with desperation and outrage. Her hands reached out, grasping at nothing, at air, at the looming threat before her. Mrs. Granger's expression darkened immediately. Her lips curled into a snarl that did not quite reach her eyes, which blazed with a sharp, violent glint. The room seemed to shrink further as she stepped forward, the distance between predator and prey collapsing in a heartbeat. Before Helena could even blink, a sharp, resounding slap landed across her face. The sting was immediate, hot, searing, and it cut through her lingering fear with a new, sharper ache. "Silence, girl!" Mrs. Granger hissed, her voice a razor, sharper than any growl Helena had ever known. "You are nothing here but a servant. Your place is obedience, and your mouth will remain shut." Helena's hands shot to her face, fingers trembling as they pressed against her burning cheek, but they were powerless to stop the tears that sprang freely. Sobs ripped from her chest, violent and uncontrollable, shaking her from head to toe. She sank to her knees, small, trembling fingers brushing at the floor as though she could anchor herself to the earth, find some thread of safety in the unrelenting weight of fear pressing down on her. Kane's shadow lingered over her, silent, unyielding, a looming presence that seemed to drain the air from the room. His gaze was steady, unrelenting, predatory, watching her like a creature waiting for its prey to comprehend the depth of its peril. From that day onward, Helena's world became smaller, tighter, suffocating. Her chambers, once a sanctuary, a fragile harbor from the storms of life, were transformed into a prison. Every door was locked, bolted, reinforced with chains that rattled softly when the wind crept through the castle's walls. Guards patrolled at irregular intervals, their silent footsteps echoing like heartbeats through the corridors. No one could approach her, no one could speak with her, no one could offer comfort. The privacy she once clung to, the small sense of dignity she had, were stripped away, leaving only the constant presence of captivity. Helena spent hours pacing, hugging herself as though she could somehow rebuild a protective shell around her trembling body. She pressed her back against the walls, rocking slightly, whispering prayers and pleas that sounded hollow even to her own ears. Her thoughts always returned to Chris. Was he safe? Was he hurting? Was he crying in the same way she cried, alone in a darkened room? The pain of separation gnawed at her more than any physical discomfort, more than the fear of the chained wolf, or the threat in Kane's voice, or Mrs. Granger's cruel glares. The thought that Chris could be suffering because of her, or in spite of her absence, made her heart ache beyond endurance. Night fell like a dark shroud. The torches had burned low in the corridors. The hallways grew colder, and Helena's chamber became a crucible of fear. She was taken once more, lifted by unseen hands that felt like extensions of the dungeon's shadowed will. The white dress, forced upon her, swished against her legs, an unwelcome reminder of the fragility and helplessness her captors had designed for her. The stone staircase leading to the dungeon was slick with moisture and the sweat of fear, each step treacherous, echoing the relentless rhythm of her panicked heart. When the massive iron door swung open, Helena froze. The red glow of eyes in the darkness was sharper, more menacing, more alive than ever before. The wolf's muscles rippled under thick, dark fur, eyes blazing with fury and intelligence. Helena's chest tightened, lungs refusing to expand fully as every fiber of her being screamed, run, hide, escape. Yet there was nowhere to go, nowhere to vanish, nowhere to survive without the risk of the beast's teeth and claws. Each night it became the same terrifying ritual. She would wake in the dungeon, trembling, every nerve a live wire. The wolf would snarl, the chains straining, claws scraping, each movement a calculated threat meant to break her. Helena pressed herself into the farthest corner of the stone chamber, shivering violently, tears streaming freely, trying desperately to control the screams that threatened to escape her throat. The wolf seemed to grow with each passing night, its energy more frenzied, its anger almost tangible. The chains stretched, claws gouged the stone floor in shallow, sharp scars, leaving reminders of the predator's strength and the fragile nature of her own existence. The red eyes never left her, tracking, judging, reminding her that she was prey, helpless and trapped. Morning brought no relief, only a cruel respite. She would awaken in her chambers, safely locked away with fresh food, her hands trembling uncontrollably, body sore, yet alive. The cycle repeated, relentless, cruel, and without pause. Days blended into nights, nights into endless fear. Her mind began to fray. Every detail haunted her, the red glow of the wolf's eyes, the scent of damp stone, the iron tang of the chains, the guttural growls vibrating through the dungeon floor, and the silent, ever-present watchfulness of Kane and Mrs. Granger. Sleep became a battlefield. Even in rest, the memory of red eyes glared through the darkness, waiting, unblinking, omnipresent. Her prayers, her desperate hope for Chris, the whispers to the moon goddess, all felt increasingly like a distant luxury she could no longer afford. Yet, despite the suffocating weight of terror, the relentless cycle of nightmarish captivity, Helena survived. She endured because she had no other choice. She endured for Chris. She endured for herself. She endured because fear, no matter how suffocating, had not yet claimed the last thread of her spirit. The moonlight touched the cold stone floors of the dungeon once more, the wolf's growl resonating like a warning. Helena, trembling, shivering, but still standing within herself, understood that each night was a test, each encounter a cruel lesson in endurance and terror. The threat was constant, looming, unavoidable. And yet somewhere deep within her, a fragile ember of defiance remained. The trials had only begun. Each day and night was a new battle, a new dance with fear, with the wolf, with Kane, with the merciless Mrs. Granger. Helena shivered, not just from the cold of the dungeon or the sting of the previous day's punishments, but from the realization that her survival, her very life, was a test of will and courage she had yet to fully understand. She was trapped, hunted, terrified, but not yet defeated. And so the cycle of fear, of threats, of crimson eyes and cold chains continued, each moment sharper, more piercing, and more inescapable than the last. Helena, though battered and broken in body and spirit, clung to the fragile thread of survival, for Chris, for hope, for the faint, flickering ember of her own defiance. The threat was absolute. The dungeon, the wolf, Kane, Mrs. Granger, and the relentless nights. They were all real, unyielding, inescapable. Helena knew with chilling clarity that what lay ahead was far worse than what she had endured. Her trials had only just begun, and the shadows of fear stretched ahead, longer and darker than ever before. Chapter 8. The Night She Stays Awake. The dungeon that had once been her prison now felt like an abyss stretched infinitely in every direction, a hollow cavern of despair echoing with every past scream and sob Helena had uttered. The rough stone walls pressed against her back, icy and unyielding, carrying with them the memories of endless nights of torment, of chains scraping against stone, of the wolf's menacing red eyes glinting in the half-light. Her muscles ached from hours of curling up, tensing, bracing herself against the fear that had become her constant companion. Her hands, blistered and raw, rested limply in her lap, fingers twitching involuntarily. Her lips were cracked, trembling from dryness and the salt of her tears, yet her body refused the surrender it had so often claimed in previous nights. Tonight, something had shifted. Tonight she did not pass out. She wasn't sure if it was courage, exhaustion, desperation, or some mysterious flicker of determination deep within her. Whatever it was, it kept her eyes wide open, unblinking, despite the terror clawing at her chest. The long hours spent in the wolf's proximity, the snapping jaws, the growls resonating like thunder in the stone chamber. These had hardened something within her, something primal, something that refused to yield. She felt it now, a fragile ember of defiance against the relentless dark. The silence was overwhelming at first, a deafening, palpable entity that pressed into her ears, her bones, her very heart. The wolf sat a few feet away, massive and imposing even while chained. Its form, outlined faintly by the sliver of moonlight that crept through the high window, radiated coiled strength. Every muscle was taut, every sinew stretched like a bowstring ready to snap. Its red eyes glimmered faintly, unblinking, tracking her with unsettling intelligence, as if measuring her courage or her weakness. Helena's lips quivered as she whispered almost inaudibly to herself, I cannot die. I must stay. I must survive, for Chris." A heavy sigh escaped her lungs, followed by a shallow, trembling breath that rattled her chest like wind through hollow timber. Her throat constricted with emotion, but then, almost instinctively, she began to sing. At first her voice was timid, barely a whisper, fragile as the wing of a sparrow trembling against a storm. The notes were hesitant, wavering, uncertain, but as they rose and fell through the cold air of the dungeon, something shifted. The melody grew stronger, more confident, threading through the darkness, stitching together courage and defiance into every syllable. She sang the song she had carried in her heart for years, the lullaby she had hummed in the gardens under moonlight, the gentle tune she had whispered while harvesting wolfsbane, the song that had sustained her through every lonely moment of despair. The wolf's growls softened, a low, cautious rumble that seemed to tremble with curiosity. Its massive body sagged slightly, the tension coiling through its frame unwinding like a spring, finally allowed a small measure of relief. The creature's head lowered gently to the cold stone floor, and for the first time, its gaze did not pierce with accusation but lingered with something almost watchful. Helena froze mid-note, breath catching as she observed a subtle, extraordinary transformation. Shadows clung to the wolf's body, and yet they shimmered faintly, bending and twisting as though yielding to an invisible force. Time warped in the dungeon. Minutes stretched into hours, hours condensed into moments. Helena remained rooted to the stone floor, standing yet trembling, observing the chain links, the sheen of iron and silver, and the subtle play of moonlight across the massive form of the wolf. Her bare feet brushed the cold stones, her dress whispering soft, ghostly sounds with each minute movement. Not daring to breathe too loudly, she held herself still, caught in a spell of terror and awe. And then it happened. A flash of light, subtle but undeniable, appeared in the corner of the dungeon, separate from the moonlight that crept through the window. Helena's pulse jumped into her throat, pounding so violently she feared it would burst through her ribcage. The dungeon itself seemed to tremble, shadows quivering as sparks flickered across the darkness like molten silver dust. Helena's heart raced, a chaotic rhythm of wonder and fear. She rose carefully to her feet, every movement measured, breath shallow but steadying. Fireflies, or something akin to them, tiny motes of living light, began to drift through the window, drawn toward the pulsing energy that radiated from the wolf. The lights wove in intricate patterns, a luminous dance that transformed the dungeon from a chamber of terror into a stage for something utterly magical. Moonlight glimmered off their delicate forms, casting delicate ribbons of radiance across Helena's quivering face and the cold stone walls. Her breath caught, throat constricted with awe. The air itself seemed to hum with an unseen power, electric warmth coursing against her skin, contrasting sharply with the usual chill that had become a second skin over years of fear. And then, impossibly, the wolf began to transform. The darkness seemed to twist and bend around the beast. The massive muscles coiled and shifted beneath thick fur as shadows danced across its immense frame. The chain rattled softly, iron and silver protesting against the strain of its contained power, yet the creature remained bound, restrained but pulsating with life. Sparks of light darted across its fur, illuminating the raw energy within, and Helena felt her knees weaken under the sheer force of the revelation. The wolf's form shimmered, twisted and coalesced, every movement fluid and terrifyingly beautiful. Time seemed to fracture, the dungeon itself vibrating with the weight of magic long dormant and now unleashed. And then, it was complete. Where the massive, terrifying wolf had been, there now stood a man. Tall, impossibly handsome, with shoulders broad and powerful, arms sculpted and strong, each movement radiating power. His chest glistened pale in the soft silver of moonlight, muscles taut like carved marble, and his hair fell in dark, damp waves, glistening as though woven from the shadows themselves. His eyes, emerald and piercing, met Helena's instantly, and her heart stopped. Recognition struck her like a bolt of lightning. It was the man from the gardens, her king's advisor, the one whose presence had always stirred something inexplicable within her. Her mind whirled, the realization struck with the force of a storm. He was the king. He had been the one she had sung to, unknowingly, night after night. And now, here he stood before her, alive and impossibly real, as though the magic of the dungeon itself had brought him from shadow to flesh. He stepped closer, and the moonlight highlighted every feature, every curve and plane of his face she had come to trust in fleeting glimpses, every line of strength, every hint of warmth that she had admired from afar. He radiated both danger and protection, an almost tangible aura of command that pressed against her skin, yet within his gaze lingered an unexpected softness, a tender reassurance she could hardly comprehend. "Helena!" His voice was low, resonant, carrying a weight of power that vibrated through the air around them. Yet there was tenderness in the timbre, a calm within the storm of the dungeon's magic. Her knees gave way, helpless against the force of awe, fear, and wonder. Her body could no longer hold her upright, her chest heaved, and her heart threatened to escape entirely. Words failed her, caught somewhere between terror and astonishment, unable to surface in a world suddenly too vast, too strange, too impossibly beautiful. Then, with a gentleness that shattered all the fear she had carried, he reached out. His hands, warm and steady, enveloped her with careful precision, as if she were the most fragile thing he had ever encountered. His emerald eyes never left hers, a tether in the midst of chaos and uncertainty. Helena sagged against him, body limp, relief washing over her in a tide that seemed almost painful in its intensity. The dungeon, the chains, the wolf, the fear, the despair, they all melted into a backdrop of wonder and impossible magic. Her chest rose and fell against him, breathing slowing, heartbeat settling into a rhythm guided by his own steady pulse. The moment stretched, time suspended in a rare, exquisite equilibrium. For the first time, in endless nights of terror, Helena felt safe, entirely safe, protected by the presence of someone who was both real and magical, mortal yet touched by power. The dungeon, so long a chamber of fear and punishment, had become the threshold of revelation. Secrets whispered through its stones, magic danced in the air, and Helena realized that nothing would ever be the same again. A connection had been forged in the crucible of fear, tempered by song, bound by magic, and marked by mutual recognition of their fates. And yet, though she was held, she could not shake the lingering fear, the awareness that what lay ahead was vast and unknowable. But for this single fleeting moment, the terror of the dungeon, the chained wolf, the shadows that had tormented her for so long, all of it had faded into the periphery. Her last sensation before exhaustion claimed her was the warmth of his hands, the unyielding reassurance of his touch, and the slow, steady rhythm of life and power surrounding her. And then, finally, the world slipped away. Helena fainted, sinking fully into the embrace of the man who had once been her unseen king, her song now complete, her fear momentarily silenced by the unimaginable magic of the night. The dungeon, the shadows, the iron chains, they remained. But they no longer held dominion over her heart, and in that moment, Helena knew, the night she stayed awake had changed everything. To be continued. If you enjoyed this audiobook, subscribe to my channel for the second part of this book, and also more interesting audiobooks. Join my channel by becoming a member and have early access to stories and second parts of books. Save the playlist for more upcoming audiobooks. Don't forget to give this video a thumbs up. Check out new audiobooks in my channel. Do you think Helena will ever forgive him for tormenting her? Comment your answers in the comments section. Thanks for listening.